and our panelists are going to be Dr. Haigirev Rao and Dr. Nitish Nayak. So, with one request, I will just pass on the stage to both of them. I want you to put your phones and your laptops on mute. Or Dheeraj, I request you to put everybody on mute except for the both speakers and both moderators, please. Rest everybody should be on a mute mode. Dheeraj, can you do it for us, please? Definitely. And over to you, Haigirev and Nitish, please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Vanita. And with Nitish, I am here.
Everybody's been muted. So, Haigirev sir, Nitish sir, aapka
mute button. Haigirev, you have to unmute. Nitish, you have to unmute, please.
Yeah. Am I audible, Vanita?
Yes, absolutely. Now you are audible.
Yeah. Good evening. Today's program, we have Deepak Padmanabhan and Suchit presenting 2 cases each. So we'll start off straight away. Dr. Deepak, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, IHRS, for this opportunity to present before this august audience. Some of you have already seen this case, but I would like to represent this case in our forum because I feel that it has some teaching points which we could try and discuss further with all of us. I look forward to my moderators guiding me through this presentation and interrupting me in case there is something that is not understood well. Thank you once again for this opportunity. So we are looking at a case history where we have a 68-year-old male who has presented with history of inferior wall MI in 2004. The coronary angiogram done then showed a proximal LCX lesion for which no intervention was done. He currently presented with hemodynamically stable monomorphic VT. The morphology of the VT is as given. The tachycardia cycle length was 340 milliseconds with a QRS duration of 230 milliseconds of that tachycardia cycle length. If you look closely, there is a QS pattern in the inferior leads. There is a left bundle branch block morphology for the VT, and there is negative precordial concordance suggesting that this is ventricular tachycardia more often than not. If you look at the inferior leads, the QS morphology seems to suggest that perhaps there is an epicardial origin to this particular tachycardia, something that we could keep our eyes open for. When this patient was cardioverted and the sinus rhythm ECG was made available to us, this ECG showed fragmentation of the QRS in the inferior leads, suggestive and consistent with the previous myocardial infarction, probably suggesting that the scar lies in the same region. In addition, you can see a QS in the inferior leads and a prominent Q wave in lead 2. The precordial leads seem to have retained their QRS amplitudes and do not seem to show any significant scar at this point in time. The echo for this gentleman was suggestive of an ejection fraction of 30%. The inferior, inferolateral, and the posterior left ventricle walls were akinetic. There was scarring noted on the on the echo, but no aneurysm was present. The cardiac MRI was done, which showed transmural and subepicardial scar in the inferior and the inferolateral regions of the left ventricle. The scar was essentially inhomogeneous in character. There was no hiatal hernia and no prominent left lobe of the liver was noted. We decided to go ahead with ablating this patient, given the fact that it seemed to be a stable arrhythmia, and early ablation in this patient might actually prevent him from having recurrent episodes in the future. For vascular access, our setup was as per routine. We had a right femoral artery 8 French sheath via which a F-curve thermocool ablation catheter was used. We had a 6 French. There's a typo there. There was a 6 French right femoral vein which had a RV catheter through it. A left femoral artery 6 French catheter was used for arterial monitoring. A right internal jugular 7F catheter was placed for placing the CS catheter. Up front, we had epicardial preparation for access. The substernal region was prepared for epicardial access. The mapping system used was CARTO, and we planned to take this patient under general anesthesia at the outset. We took upfront epicardial access. As you can see here, we used minimal dye, entered the pericardium, ensured that the wire was freely moving within the pericardial sinus in both RAO and LAO views. Proceeding further, after placement of the catheters, we induced the arrhythmia. The arrhythmia was very easily inducible even under general anesthesia and with varying cycle lengths. It was similar in cycle length throughout. However, this time the arrhythmia was hemodynamically unstable. Perhaps the GA contributed to the hemodynamic instability of the arrhythmia. We noted the tachycardia cycle lengths as well as took a template of this arrhythmia and stored it for further use. We decided that our strategy to proceed at this point of time would be mapping the substrate and attempting modification, and after completion of the epicardial and endocardial maps, if we could locate the border zone regions, attempt to induce the arrhythmia and do an activation and entrainment mapping from those sites. Additional vasopressors were introduced by our anesthetist at this point of time. We preferred to use vasopressin for this patient. We created a voltage map under sinus rhythm for this patient. We preferred using sinus rhythm for this patient.
Deepak, just a minute. Deepak, just a minute. There's some background noise. I think so somebody has to be muted.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Deepak, just a second. Yeah, everything is mute. Now, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
We created a voltage map in sinus rhythm for this patient. Our main reason for creating a voltage map in sinus rhythm was the worry that if the RV catheter moves while creating both the endocardial as well as the epicardial maps, our maps would be useless if done under RV pacing. If we had an ICD in place, perhaps we would have increased the rate of pacing to create a substrate voltage map under RV pacing. Having created the voltage map, we noted that the areas of scar were kind of corresponding to the areas of scar which were noted on the MRI in both the endocardial and the epicardial regions. We then proceeded to induce the arrhythmia. Under vasopressin, we were able to gain a relative measure of stability. So we decided to proceed with entrainment. Given that we wanted to confirm the mechanism of the arrhythmia, we did entrainment from the right ventricle, which we knew was possibly not within the circuit at this point of time. The catheter was placed at the proximal right ventricle in the inflow, and then entrainment was attempted from this site. As you can see, there was entrainment achieved. There was capture. It seemed manifest, and the post-pacing tachycardia cycle length was around 60 milliseconds beyond the tachycardia. The post-pacing cycle length was 60 milliseconds more than the tachycardia cycle length, clearly suggestive that the RV was not a part of the circuit. We went ahead further to pace at around 360 milliseconds too, in order to document that at progress at decreasing intervals, there was progressive fusion present, thereby confirming that this was a reentrant arrhythmia. In the VT circuit, the RV was pretty much outside the circuit, not present in at all. We then started to place our catheter within the LV at an zone which was a border zone region as per our substrate map. During the arrhythmia, we got these signals. We have a couple of signals on the screen here. We have a mid-diastolic signal and a pre-systolic signal. Both these signals look very good. It seems that contact is adequate at this point in time. We wanted to locate whether either of these signals was the local signal and what was the location of this site within the tachycardia circuit. Therefore, we proceeded to entrain from this location. The tachycardia cycle length here was 345 milliseconds. Entrainment was done. And as far as fusion is concerned, I would just like to draw your attention to leads 1 in pacing and during tachycardia, which seems relatively similar. Same goes for the inferior leads 2, 3 and AVF. But if you look at leads V4 and V5, there seems to be a slight change in the morphology of the QRS as compared to the tachycardia. So approximately a 10 by 12, not a perfect fusion, concealed fusion at this site, would go for rather manifest fusion. So when we look at the intracardiac electrograms at this site, this is what we had. Again, the arrhythmia was accelerated to the tachycardia cycle length. The tachycardia continued after coming off pacing. Interestingly, the mid-diastolic signal was not captured. The pre-systolic signal present was well captured here and was released immediately after pacing. Looking at the post-pacing intervals, the post-pacing interval showed that the last paced QRS was in fact this QRS, not the immediate after QRS. As you can see from the RV catheter, which is accelerated to 310 milliseconds with this beat 2, this being the QRS, the stim to the QRS was around 310 milliseconds. The post-pacing interval was 365 milliseconds, which you compare to a tachycardia cycle length of 345 milliseconds was 20 milliseconds off, suggesting that the site was within the circuit of the tachycardia. However, given the long stim to QRS during the time of entrainment, suggestive of more a very proximal site in the tachycardia circuit, probably in the outer loop. Remember, this was manifest fusion and not concealed fusion here. So probably in the diagram, probably we are at this location of the tachycardia circuit. Another concerning thing for us was the absence of capture of this signal. Whether this signal was a signal which was nearby or this signal was a signal which was epicardial was unclear at this point. Therefore, we proceeded to entrain from all sites within the endocardium which had a similar signal. However, despite varying voltages and despite varying sites of pacing, we were unable to capture this signal at all, suggesting that perhaps in the local region, this signal was not present and was not capturable. So, leading us to believe that this signal was a far field signal which was recorded by the antenna of the ablation catheter. Remember, the ablation catheter has a 3.5 mm tip, which is capable of recording signals across the myocardium, if at all. Given this information, we then decided to go epicardial and went to a site diametrically opposite on the substrate map to the signal on the endocardial location. As you can see, from the onset of the QRS, again we see a mid-diastolic signal. The onset of QRS to the mid-diastolic signal was nearly similar. In the epicardium, it was around 70 milliseconds, whereas endocardially, we had it around 76 milliseconds. Looking at the fragmentation on the proximal electrode and a possible double potential signal, if you look closely enough, a probable far field with a near field, which is here, we decided to attempt entrainment from this side too. Tachycardia cycle length by this time was around 350 milliseconds. The stim or the EGM to the onset of the QRS was approximately 175 milliseconds here. This was entrainment done at this site. If you look at the entrainment, lead 1 seems exactly the same. Inferior leads seem exactly the same. Interestingly, the stim to the QRS, as we've already noted, seems to be very long. This looks like a 12 by 12 match concealed fusion at this site. Looking at the intracardiac electrograms, again, we have accelerated the RV or the tachycardia to the cycle length that we were pacing at. The tachycardia continues after the pacing has been completed. You are capturing the signal that you see here, and the stim to the QRS, as we noted earlier, was approximately 175 to 180. The post-pacing interval was an exact match to the tachycardia cycle length, suggesting that we were in a very protected site within the tachycardia circuit, probably the isthmus of the tachycardia circuit. Again, since ablation for a tachycardia does not really consist of just a single burn, we do not know how wide the isthmus was. We wanted an additional site in the epicardium where we could demonstrate presence of that site within the circuit so as to be able to create a line of ablation. We marked this site, tagged it, and decided to go ahead for looking at other potentials in that vicinity. Sure enough, closely, we were able to find a similar kind of electrogram, again, pre-systolic to mid-diastolic, proximally showing the double potential that we were able to see in the distal electrode at the previous site, with a relatively isoelectric line in between. The stim, the EGM to the QRS was just 80 milliseconds here. Tachycardia cycle length maintained at 350 milliseconds. Entrainment was attempted at this site, again suggestive of a concealed fusion 12 by 12. Looking, the stim to the EGM is near simultaneous or 80 milliseconds, as we noted in the previous slide. Looking at the intracardiac electrograms, the tachycardia has been accelerated to the pacing cycle length. Post pacing, the tachycardia has resumed. There is capture of this EGM, at least the proximal part of the EGM. If you look at the distal, if you look at the proximal electrode, you can see probably only the first part of that double potential signal has to be, seems to be captured. And when you release it, you can see the tachycardia cycle length post-pacing interval of 350 milliseconds, again suggesting that this site is right within the tachycardia circuit. But given the stim to QRS duration of just 80 milliseconds, it's probably more towards the exit than the previous site. So now we have 3 sites which are more or less nearby the tachycardia circuit. One, the outer loop, which was endocardial, and 2 sites which were essentially epicardial, which formed part of the isthmus and near the exit. So we proceeded to create a line from the epicardium going towards the endocardium and connecting these spots. Prior to doing any epicardial ablation, we paced at a high output to rule out the presence of phrenic nerve at that site, and also performed an angiogram to see for presence of any major epicardial coronary artery at this location. It wasn't present here, so we decided to continue with our ablation lesions, trying to create a line extending from the epicardial sites going towards the endocardium. Sure enough, while in the middle of creating this line, we were able to terminate the tachycardia without an extra stimuli during the ablation, after which no further arrhythmia was induced. We continued ablating from the endocardial and the epicardial sites on adjacent locations and connected this to the region of scar which was present endocardially, predominantly endocardially. After this, no tachycardia was induced. We woke up the patient, attempted to re-induce the tachycardia by pacing from 2 sites, the RV and the LV, at 2 different cycle lengths, including triples, but there was no additional arrhythmia induced. In conclusion, therefore, we would like to say that creating a substrate map aids in the delineation of substrate and in assessing potential sites of interest for entrainment during tachycardia. Entrainment mapping is a useful technique during the mapping of ventricular tachycardia. VT circuits may be transmural. Identifying local signals may require pacing maneuvers, and ablating at those sites without confirming which the local signal is may not be very useful, since it might cause edema and probably transmission of further ablation lesions in the vicinity may not happen. VT ablation, however, is not a substitute for ICD implantation, and we did implant an ICD after the performance of this ablation. In the post-procedure care, we did give the patient some steroids in the epicardial space. We did give the patient lidocaine prior to removing the epicardial sheath, and left a pigtail for about 6 hours. Once there was no drainage seen from the pigtail, we removed the pigtail too. Colchicine can be considered if on the next day post-procedure, the patient seems to have significant pericarditis for a brief period of time. Thank you for your patient hearing. Happy to take some questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Deepak. A good presentation. Actually, yours is I should say, a very elegant demonstration of entrainment mapping in patients with scar VT. It is one of the classical ways in which this ablation. There are 2 issues generally which are going to arise, which everyone in a case like this. One thing is you had a very focused case in which you had a single VT. Of course, it was hemodynamically unstable outside, but unstable when the GA, hypotension and all this caused, but it was stable outside. That is okay. But in general, patients like this present with different morphologies of VTs and different VTs also. So that is one question is, in such case, a more extensive sinus mapping to bring out all the abnormal potentials, late, double potentials, fractionated signals, all this extensive sinus mapping would actually predate doing a entrainment. That is one point.
I would agree. I would agree. Sir.
And second point is epicardial. Yeah, you right from your CT scan, I could see that the left lobe of liver, you're focused on epicardial of this patient. Now, in general, there is always, all these meetings, there's always a discussion as to in such cases, when you had a very discrete scar, you go ahead with an extensive endocardial sinus mapping and ablation, and then would you, if it's still, recurring, would you go for an epicardial mapping and ablation? These are the 2 points which would generally arise in discussion or cases.
I would agree, sir. I mean, very well brought out points. Frankly speaking, sir, if I had more than one arrhythmia, I would go ahead and probably use a substrate modification strategy at the get-go. Substrate modification strategy targeted at modifying those signals which are beyond the QRS, so-called late potentials. Once you modify those signals, once you're able to create a map after ablating those signals, it is then possible for us to reduce that burden, high burden of multiple morphologies of VT into a single morphology, which you could then map. Or sometimes if you've done a well enough substrate modification, there is no arrhythmia left at the end of the case for you to map. So that is well taken. We did have all those signals here, but did not have enough leeway to show it in this presentation because I wanted it to focus more on the entrainment and the local signal part of it. As far as the second point goes, sir, it's been well documented that VT circuits may not essentially be present in the epicardium when the exit is epicardial. You could very well have an epicardial exit like our case, but the entire circuit could be endocardial. So we could get away without accessing the endocardium for these patients by performing extensive ablation or substrate modification on the endocardium. Unfortunately, sir, the problem with performing a late epicardial stick is the fact that the patient is usually highly heparinized at that point of time, which makes the epicardial stick slightly more challenging then. It's not that it can't be done. We can always reverse with protamine and do the epicardial stick if needed. But when at the outset, we have an exit which seems to be epicardial, we thought it would be wise to take epicardial access at the get-go. At our center, we usually, sir, likes to keep the wire in epicardially without the presence of a sheath if the suspicion is low. But if the suspicion is high, as in this case, placing a sheath in the epicardium along with a catheter within it, critical to place a catheter within the sheath placed in the epicardium, usually helps us compare signals. Sometimes even if you are not mapping, to make sure that it's an epicardial signal versus a local signal within the endocardium, you can always move your catheter to just perform a quick check on the EP tracer or the signal recording system rather than on the Carter. Those were the only two reasons we went ahead to perform the epicardial stick at the outset. And your point that an endocardial ablation itself might have completed or made the patient non-inducible for the VT is very well taken, sir.
Anything else? Sorry, go to the next question. Any question, Nitish?
This case, I think so. There are a couple of questions that I suppose you must have put on an ICD later, did you?
Sorry, yes, sir.
There's a question Ashish has put up that I suppose ICD must have been implanted subsequently.
Yes.
How many patients do you routinely take up before putting in an ICD?
Sir, with the evidence of the SMASH VT, the VANISH trials, early VT ablation seems to do better. There has been a paper which has recently come out which did not show the benefit of early ablation versus ICD implantation. It seems to think that you ablate only after 2 or 3 episodes of the arrhythmia. It seems to be equal to doing an early ablation. The data at that time was not available to us, but even for that particular study, there was a high crossover rate of around 10%. Patients who were deemed or who were designed to have deferred ablation strategy crossed over into an early ablation strategy. The total ablation time for that case, for those study where they were ablated early, was just about 20 minutes. For our case, and in a routine VT case, sir, we are finding that we need to ablate for at least 40 to 50 minutes to actually render the VT non-inducible, even if you have a multiple VT scenario. So given that, we thought it was more prudent for us to go ahead with the ablation upfront and then implant an ICD for this case. Most of our patients are not similar. Most of our patients are unable to afford the ICD. So VT ablation becomes a primary mode of management for them at our center.
I think so. We are 25 minutes into the presentation, so we could move to the next case if everybody is okay with it.
Yeah, please go ahead with presentation.
Sorry about that. Here is our second case. This was a patient who was a 68-year-old male, no known comorbidities, who presented with shortness of breath. This was progressive over the last 4 to 6 months, and currently the patient presented to us in NYHA class 3. This was his ECG at the time of presentation. The ECG was suggestive of sinus rhythm with bigeminy. PVCs were noted, which were similar in morphology, with a fairly similar coupling interval between the sinus beat and the PVC. Looking at the PVC itself, the PVC had negative QRS or a negative QS in the indeed AVR and AVL, suggestive of an outflow tract morphology. Leads 2, 3, and AVF were strongly positive, suggesting a very anterior location in the outflow tract. Lead V1 was essentially a QS with an early transition, suggestive of probably a left-sided origin. But given that there was a slur which was noted in the inferior leads, as well as in the lower part of lead AVL, the negative part of lead AVL, probably a Q wave 2, P wave 2. But given this slur, we suspected an epicardial or anterior epicardial location more towards the center as compared to the periphery of the epicardium near the outflow tracts. Remember, lead 1 here is a positive negative complex and not a purely negative as would have been if it was lateral, and it's not purely positive as it would have been if it was more rightward in location. The precordial transition was essentially early at V1 and V2, and the rest of the QRS seemed to be fairly stable. Given this, we reviewed the echo for this patient. The ejection fraction here was 25%. There was a dilated left atrium and a left ventricle. Mild mitral regurgitation was present. However, myocardial thickness was preserved on echo. We performed a Holter. On the Holter, the PVC burden was 25%. There was a single predominant morphology, which was seen as on the ECG. Episodes of non-sustained VT were also noted, with the first beat of the non-sustained VT similar to the PVC, which was seen on the ECG. The coupling interval varied slightly, but the PVC morphology remained the same. Cardiac MRI was considered for this patient, but was not performed since the PVC burden was high, giving rise to the possibility of poor quality scans. The options available to us at this point of time were to suppress the PVC with medications and then perform the MRI, versus perform an ablation and then review outcomes on the ejection fraction. And if the ejection fraction still remained low, proceed with an MRI. We decided to use the second option since there was preservation of the myocardial thickness and no evident abnormality on the echo for any scarring or any abnormal infiltration. So taking this patient to the lab, we did note that the PVC morphology was fairly similar. The non-sustained VT triggered by the PVC, which was seen initially, was also seen. And the coupling interval did not vary significantly. Shooting this up, I'd like to draw your attention to the change between the first and the second beats of the non-sustained VT. Since the first beat was fairly constant, we decided to use the first beat if non-sustained VT was used for mapping, or a solitary PVC whenever it was available. There was chance that there could be variable fusion that could occur, and that is why this strategy was adopted. Our setup, as usual, was a right femoral artery 8 French sheath for the catheter for retrograde access if needed. Left femoral artery 6 French for pressure monitoring and coronary angiogram if needed. Right femoral vein 8 French again to map the RV with the ablation catheter. 6 French again for an RV catheter in case the PVC is dried up and we needed to stimulate. Since we were anticipating a more anterior location as well as an epicardial location of the PVC, we did have a 7 French RIJ sheath put in to use a St. Jude fixed curve CS catheter, decapolar, but not the short one, actually the long one, which would aid us go up to the AIV. The mapping system used was CARTO. The ablation catheter was the Smart Touch DF thermocool catheter. Epicardial preparation was also done, given that the patient had the lower ejection fraction, and we would attempt to suppress the PVC by ablation as much as possible. So we did push out the CS catheter right up out as far as it would go. And at this location, we were able to see that you had fused beads, which we noted at the beginning on the surface ECG. And the earliest to be was relatively early, but not earlier than the PVC located here. So purely an epicardial location at this site was unlikely. If at all epicardial, it would be probably more medial than the location of this electrode. So these were the earliest electrograms seen epicardially in the coronary sinus. Now endocardially, when we went retrograde, both the right as well as the left coronary sinus of Valsalva were late. Given that, we then prolapsed our catheter beneath the valve and attained this location, which was relatively right opposite the distal tip of the coronary sinus catheter. Our views are in RAO and LAO respectively. At this location, we did find this fragmented electrogram, which was noted. When measuring the far field here, this seemed to be more earlier than the CS electrode from the origin of the PVC. As far as I was concerned, this was probably at the onset of the QRS in lead AVF. At this site, we did pace mapping to see the PVC or the pace map at this site, and noted that there were subtle differences, even though the majority of the QRS looked similar in the precordial leads. Lead V1 seemed similar, although the height of the R wave here is more. Lead 1 had a higher R wave in the target PVC as compared to our site, and AVF had more fractionation and a more negative component here at this location. We marked this site in PVC and in sinus rhythm on the 3D anatomical map. And if you draw attention right here, you can see the far field seen very well, but there is also a prominent R wave or initial deflection noted on the unipolar. This suggested to us that although this site, wherever this far field signal was being recorded, was early, it was not at the site of the ablation electrode at this point. So again, the catheter position as previously noted. So assuming that the 3.5 mm tip of the ablation catheter was recording a far field signal, the site of origin of the PVC was probably in this vicinity on RAO and this vicinity on LAO. Given this location and the possible comorbidity of taking an epicardial stick, we decided to attempt ablation from this location. Before ablation, our thoughts for where our catheter was at this point of time could be summarized by this intracardiac echo and this anatomical picture. Again, this is not from this case, but this is where we thought we were. The tip of the catheter being prolapsed beneath the valve, placed right across this mound of tissue, which is essentially more anteriorly the summit of the left ventricle. We attempted to perform an angiogram here. At the time of angiogram, during the RAO, we didn't see any significant coronaries at that location. But by the time we took a shot in LAO, our catheter had dropped down. Remember, the original position of the catheter was here. However, since we had taken a location-only point in sinus rhythm and PVC, we were able to gain the previously mentioned location with the help of the electroanatomical map. Critically, even at this site, since we have not changed the orientation of the collimators, we don't see any significant coronary artery at that location. We proceeded to ablate at this location. Our ablation strategy was to start at 30 watts, irrigated with 17 ml per minute irrigation. As the PVC suppress, increase the power to reach up to 40 and concomitantly increase the irrigation to 30. We did have partial suppression. Since we had partial suppression, we went ahead to increase the power up to 42, gave a longer lesion for up to 240 milliseconds 3 times, 240 seconds 3 times. We changed our irrigant to half normal saline and then connected the lesions above and below the valve on opposing surfaces. When we ablated above the valve, we used a lower power, approximately 17 watts, with care taken to tag the location of the ablation on the electroanatomical map to avoid falling into the left main. Once we completed this set of lesions, there was no PVC which was noted. There is myocardial change which was noted at the local site as evidenced by the fractionation of the local electrogram. And on follow-up on the next day too, we were free from PVCs. The patient is currently on follow-up at 3 months. Echo shows significant improvement in the ejection fraction. There is a reduction in the chamber dilatation. Since there is symptomatic improvement, we are attempting tapering off of the anti-heart failure drugs at present. Since the patient has responded to the ablation of the PVC, which seems to be coming from the epicardial location near the LV summit, we decided to not go ahead with the MRI for this patient. In summary, therefore, PVC-mediated cardiomyopathy is a reversible cause of heart failure. ECG is useful for preempting the anticipated challenges for the case. Mapping can be done from anatomically proximate structures. Unipolar signals are useful to map the site of origins for the PVC, and vantage points can be used to deliver RF energy to distant sites. The caveat being that you may have to deliver more energy, and therefore care to damage critical structures has to be taken at this point. Thank you for your patient hearing. Happy to take some questions.
Great case, Deepak. Once again. Two comments is, one thing is, if you have a PVCs coming from the LV, which you are not thinking it is from the coronary sinus and it is coming from the LV, it is always, as you had rightly said, it's always better to have an imaging like PET or MRI, because the things that these days they bring out, they no longer surprise us. There are so many things that they bring out, and you are absolutely right in your strategy, but it improved. So that is a different thing. Also, your location was LV summit. So this is a different case. But in general, I would like to say that if it is left, it's always better to have an imaging. Second thing is the PVC burden. When you have a dilated cardiomyopathy like this, with a suppressed ejection fraction, and a monomorphic PVC, the Holter really doesn't help, because it doesn't make a difference what the burden is. You're absolutely right in ablating this. But did I miss, or was there a carto imaging that did you not show? A 3D mapping imaging of the sinuses and all that, did you show, or did I miss?
I didn't show them, sir. I didn't think, I wanted this to be a short case. I didn't want to take away from the EGMs on this case. Carto in this case was essentially meant to just tag those sites and not really useful as far as the origin of the PVC was concerned. The only significant point on Carto was the unipolar, which is much better seen on Carto as compared to EP tracer. So that's why that was the image that I included. We did have images here. I seem to think that if you have this location where you have a QS in lead V1 with a small R in lead 1, it's probably from the LV summit. And instead of going epicardial, we could attempt to go beneath the valve and deliver energy from that vantage point. That is definitely not the site of origin of the PVC. It is just a vantage point from which we could deliver energy. And your point about LV PVCs, not outflow tract, but cavity PVCs requiring MRI, requiring PET is very well taken. The registry actually has shown, but Dr. Lakireddy has actually shown that there is more inflammation that you find when you actually do PET on these patients. And these can probably be suppressed with immunosuppression steroids rather than us attempting to ablate them. That point is very well taken.
Great, great cases. Nitish?
I think so, but one thing I was, this coronary sinuses didn't show anything, because your leads V5, V6, if I remember correctly, didn't show any S wave. So I was thinking you would find something, and your inferior leads were very tall positives, making me think that you were really high up. But the site that you're located is practically the undersurface of the aortomitral area.
Yes, sir. I would agree. The summit is essentially, also the most anterior part of your LV. If you get something that is coming right, this is not a great image for that, but if you get something arising from the epicardium, entirely, it would still present anterior. 2-3 AVF would still be highly positive, and you would get a QS in lead V1. The trick, the key for me on this case was, sir, the early transition. If it was a RVOT kind of a location, the transition probably would have been later as compared to an early transition. And the lack of a prominent R wave in lead 1 for this case was again very important for me, because the summit again does not have too much of muscle. It is just muscle, and then it overlies the valve. So given that there is extremely small amount of muscle there, there is no significant tall R wave that you would expect, which would be more common with a right-sided RVOT kind of PVC, which is below the valve. But your point was well taken, sir. Thank you.
Now there's a question. Have you done bipolar ablation anytime?
I have not, sir. I rather use half normal saline to attempt it, but I've never had a case where we had to use bipolar ablation for the ablation of a PVC. I've found reasonable success using half normal saline in different cases with high irrigation, especially when you go into higher power. The key probably would be, if you are below the valve, you can get away with it, but above the valve, you need to be extremely careful. You need to know where the os of the coronaries are, so that your catheter does not tip into that. That is a nightmare and probably will lead to coding of the patient on table. So that is something that needs to be very, very careful about. I find this ICE image to be very useful whenever I think about this location. It's prolapsed beneath the valves, bent up, taken up to here, and when you release the curve, you get in firm contact with this location. And this image was actually taken during ablation, where you can see the change in the myocardium becoming more refractile, suggesting that a good lesion is forming. It's critical again, because either the location is mid-myocardial or epicardial, that we give enough amount of energy at this site so as to be able to suppress it at a distance. Otherwise, it will suppress transiently and come back. Therein again, the half normal saline helps, because it increases the depth of the lesion given the low osmolarity. Thank you, sir.
That was a fantastic case and an excellent demonstration. I think we'll have to move on to the next case now. And I think Suchit is here.
Yeah, I'm here,
Suchit
sir.
is there, and Suchit. Okay, he's sharing his screen. Great. Hi, Suchit.
Hi, hi. So wonderful cases by Deepak. So
Hi, Suchit.
I
Welcome.
will be sharing some SVT cases.
You'll have to be a little louder, Suchit. We can't hear you very well.
Okay. So I will use the microphone then.
Please use the mic closer to your face.
Yeah.
And Suchit, you have to start sharing your screen also.
Yeah. I will be sharing. Okay. Hello.
Yes, Suchit.
Am I audible? No.
You have to speak a little loudly.
Okay. So I'm sharing the screen then. Share screen.
The center button is share screen. Please put that on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the green one.
Share.
The green one, right?
Yeah. Now it is sharing.
No, it is not.
Not yet.
One second. Permission from the host, it is telling. Why I don't know.
Okay. Okay, you require the permission. Why hasn't Dheeraj given that? Dheeraj?
It is already permitted, ma'am.
Okay, let's see. Now, yeah, it's coming.
Yeah.
Okay, now it is.
Great.
Great.
So,
Yes,
on.
just speak a
Put
little
it in the
loudly,
full-
Suchit.
Put it in the full
it's
screen.
not audible.
It is audible, but it is a little less audible. Now you are better. And just go on the full screen, please. Slide sharing full screen.
Slide share full screen. Okay. Why it has shorted? 1 second.
So hit on that wine glass.
Yeah. Now it is visible. Yeah. Hello.
Great. Yes.
Okay. So so I will be discussing two SVT cases. The first case is of a 35-year-old gentleman with a history of recurrent palpitations and pre-syncope. And he needed DC cardioversion in an outside hospital twice for a wide QRS tachycardia, for which the tachy ECG was not available to us when he reported to us. And the baseline ECG was suggestive of a left posterior accessory pathway, pre-excited ECG. I have shared the EP ECGs. I'm not having the ECG which was coming on the OPD. So the echo was done, which was normal, and because of the history of needing cardioversion, wide QRS tachycardia, and a pre-excitation, we decided for a EP study and ablation. So this was the basal rhythm, sinus rhythm, where it was seen that there is a pre-excitation with an HV of around 14 milliseconds, and pre-excitation was suggestive of a left posterior accessory pathway. And this was a sinus rhythm baseline ECG, the intracardiac ECG, which showed a sharp signal in a CS34. I don't know what is it, maybe some pathway potential or not. There's some maneuvers that time I have not done. So difficult to tell, but definitely there is a sharp spike between the atrium and the ventricle. And on pacing from the CS proximal, we had more pre-excitation, and that also was suggestive of pathway near the left side we have gone. And so then the patient had a bout of atrial fibrillation on rapid atrial pacing, and this showed that it was a fast conduction of the atrial fibrillation with the shortest pre-excited RR interval of 188 milliseconds, indicating this was a significant pathway which definitely needed to be ablated. After the atrial fibrillation termination, we got this rhythm basically. So this is a wide QRS rhythm which was going on for quite some time, maybe around 1 to 2 minutes before it converted to sinus rhythm. So the question is, what is this rhythm basically? This is the intracardiac of that rhythm. This rhythm is starting with a sharp signal which is earliest in CS34, and the morphology of the rhythm is almost like a full pre-excited rhythm. So, and high RA was late also. Means it is not a sinus rhythm, it is some rhythm which were probably arising from this area in the near the CS34 area, and it has a sharp signal. So anyway, it cannot be junctional because junction will not be pre-excited. Also, it will not have an eccentric conduction. So it is to do something with that near pathway location. So what are the possibilities we want to discuss? So possible genesis, there are 3 possibilities we kept in mind. So if we think that can be a coronary sinus automaticity at the location of the pathway, that is one of the possibility. The potential thought to be accessory pathway potential can be also a CS muscle potential also, because it is also seen commonly, that CS muscle potential. It can also be a pathway automaticity, but pathway automaticity is usually documented in the atriovascular pathways, which are not unablated pathways, means atriovascular pathways, having some decremental properties or avinodal properties. Other than that, the past records have data has shown that it can be also seen in the left-sided accessory pathways, but that was after ablation. The third possibility, it can be an atrial arrhythmia from that area, which is conducting down to the ventricle. So coming to this abnormal automaticity, it is normally seen in the sinus node, AP node, coronary sinus ostium, and crista terminalis, and it is seen in cells with a spontaneous diastolic depolarization. Now, abnormal automaticity can be seen if ablation is there that unmasks the spontaneous depolarization and also injures the cell, or this can be under influence of drugs such as isoproterenol. Abnormal automaticity can also be seen in ligament of Marshall, atrial muscular slips into pulmonary vein. So these are some of the papers which I have gone through. One is this is one paper which is showing accessory pathway automaticity after radiofrequency ablation in a left-sided concealed accessory pathway. In this case, they have seen that after ablation, they have found that atrial pacing dissociated a spike like a potential in the mapping catheter, which may be pathway potential bearing no relationship with the atrial pacing, dissociated. Also, ventricular pacing also dissociated this potential. That's why they thought that most likely this is arising from the pathways, and it may be an indication of pathway automaticity post ablation. Apart from this, automaticity I have already told can be seen in Mahem fibers. Around 12.5% of the patients, unablated Mahems can have this automaticity. Also during ablation, we have a Mahem automaticity, which can be due to ablation. Finally, the coronary sinus automaticity. This is a editorial comment I found to the earlier case of the ablation related automaticity of the left concealed accessory pathway. There they have mentioned that it can be due to CS musculature, which can be automatic. And for that, they have given the reference of ligament of Marshall insertion at the CS. That place may show automaticity because ligament of Marshall is known to produce automatic rhythms. So this is one of the other differential diagnosis. Now coming to my case. This case had a query pathway potential. I actually did not do any maneuvers that time, but better to do a maneuver than to prove it rather than postulate it. But one of the postulates is it can be a pathway potential. Now, if it is a pathway potential, usually it indicates a pathway which is a slant pathway. Otherwise, usually we don't see a good pathway potential. Second point is that the earliest A during the tachycardia was not seen in that position of the pathway potential. It is seen more distally in the CS distal. So there also we have a suspicion that this may be relating to some slant pathway because most of the pathways are slant. So this is nothing unusual. And in the left posterior location, we usually have a slant where the ventricular end is near the septum. So that is also fitting with a possibility of slant accessory pathway. Now coming to our rhythm, we find if we look at the rhythm closely, this is the A and this is the V. Now when we have that accessory, when we have that peculiar rhythm, we see that this A and V relationship has changed. I will just focus more. So these are the A in CS 3, 4, 5, 6. Now when we cross over to 7, 8, the A becomes after the V. Initially the A is out before V, but whenever we cross over to 7, 8 or CS proximal, we see the A has crossed over after the V. Now I thought this might have some significance in relationship with the oblique pathways of the left side. So this was what I thought is that if we have a pathway which is automatically firing and goes down to the ventricle along the direction of the ventricular fiber orientation, this will give rise to a quicker V. On the other hand, if it goes back and turns where there is supposed to be a delay at this point and goes back along the atrium to the opposite to the direction of the usual atrial fiber orientation, this conduction is going to be slower. Now that's why the V will be reaching earlier than the A, the more you go along the slant towards the ventricle. Now that can be also seen here, where initially we can have a or a pathway potential which is before V, and whenever we crossing towards a more proximal location, the V is crossing before the A. So that is one of the thing I thought. So in this case, this is the thing that I just wanted to discuss this rhythm and put in what are the possibilities. And then it was actually I don't have that ablation signal, but it was done at the location of the pathway potential by antegrade, and retrograde mapping is also done. And there was VA dissociation, and we have this slide post RF. We saw that there is AV Benke-Backing, and we did not have any pre-excitation. So our white QRS rhythm appeared after an episode of AF, and the patient did not receive any isoprenaline. And unlike other case reports where it has been shown after ablation, we found it pre-ablation. And the AF and also the white QRS rhythm didn't occur after ablation of the pathway. That is also important. So the likely one of the possibility the AF was pathway dependent, and the white QRS rhythm may be related to the pathway. Thank you. So I'm ready to take questions now.
Yeah, Suchit, a few things that are arisen, and we also would like to know the most important thing about your potentials is the pacing maneuvers to distinguish. So one thing we would like to know is while atrial pacing, did you get a widening of the QRS? And that is another question that has come up is there any EGM at a termination of this rhythm. These two
Ah.
will also help in,
During termination. Hello?
Yeah. Do you have these two, like atrial pacing causing widening of the QRS and termination, EGM termination during the termination of the rhythm?
No, I don't have actually. That is, I don't have that. That is
Because your pacing maneuver, your pacing of the atrial extras would have, clearly disseminated the proximal to distal orientation.
pacing. I have a pace rhythm means before ablation, not after ablation.
And is the morphology of this broad complex identical to that of your pathway of your
Nearly same.
very clearly?
Nearly same. This was actually during AFib. Actually, that also will depend on the rate, but nearly the same morphology, I thought. This was the pathway morphology when we had atrial pacing. There also we can find that potential is there. Here also we had the potential. This one. So sinus rhythm also we had the potential not only here but here also. So if we think that this is a left-sided pathway and we start pacing from the high right atrium or from the sinus node which is near away from the pathway, so atrial conduction will go, then pathway potential will come in this way and V will come in this way. That is also fitting. We have pathway potential like of structure in 3, 4, 5, 6 both. Sharpest was in 3, 4.
And with this, you can only suggest a differential diagnosis.
Yeah, so that's why I thought that there are 3 differential diagnoses. One can be a coronary sinus related automaticity, or it can be atrial arrhythmia from that area, or it can be pathway related automaticity. These 3 we thought as diagnosis. That's why I tried to see that what is the morphology. Means if we had seen, if it is an atrial rhythm, usually that crossover of atrial complexes from this side to this side should not occur. Usually, if it is a coronary sinus, atrium should be before the ventricle always. There is no reason that ventricle will be before atrium in the proximal part, atrium will be before ventricle in the distal part. That crossover itself may indicate some pathway related automaticity, that I thought.
Yeah, but you see, only an atrial extra would clearly make out this potential is connected with the atrium or potential. Otherwise, it's
yeah, we
not
have to
possible
both actually, ventricle and atrial extra during this thing. Whether so, it is not proven, but I thought that I will, for a discussion I will share.
I think go on to your next case.
Okay. So this okay.
The final ablation point was where?
Final ablation point in that area only, CS 3-4, that area.
Okay.
Same area we had ablated. Okay. Can it be seen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is another patient where that is also an EGM in a patient in an accessory pathway, which is interesting and I thought I will share. So this is actually a 20-year-old male student with a history of recurrent palpitation and 2 episodes of syncope. And there was a documented pre-excited AFib which needed cardioversion, and echo was normal. Here the problem is the ECG is not very good, but we can see that there is something called as a double transition. There is a transition from V1 to V2, and then again the delta has reduced, and then again it has transitioned at V4. Though without full pre-excitation, we cannot tell these things. But there was a suggestion of a double transition during sinus rhythm, and also there was an isoelectric AVF. People have related this to a pathway near the cavo-tricuspid isthmus or right posterolateral area. This also ECG is not good, but it was a atrial fibrillation at very fast rate where the transition was at V4. EP study showed that the baseline HV interval was 12 milliseconds. And when we have done a pacing from the RA appendage, showed a full pre-excitation with a transition at V5. And when we had paced from the coronary sinus, there was a reduced pre-excitation. This may be indicating a preferential conduction to the AV node. That's why the pre-excitation is less here. So when we are pacing the RV apex in this patient, there was some interesting thing. We are pacing at 300 millisecond, and then there was CS signals which started moving away from CS muscular signals or something which were moving away. Slowly it was dissociating. But the right atrium, which was the earliest signal, this was still associated. So this part of atrium was dissociating when this CS muscular potentials was dissociating, and this was still associated. So when we continued that for some time, what happened is that after the dissociation of the initial part, this is the initial part, this one, these are dissociated CS muscular potentials. The other part, that the earlier part of CS signal also dissociated, no, not dissociated, it increased. There was a jump in the VA interval. So on ventricular pacing from RV apex, initial VA was associated, then at 300 millisecond, the part of the CS signal started dissociating. This may be CS muscular signals. The RA and rest of the CS were associated. And finally, there was a change of the VA interval here, apart from the CS signal dissociation. So what can account for this thing? Though the RA was also associated, this time also the RA was associated. So there was also recurrent episodes of AF which was induced during RV apical pacing, which were cardioverted. Now we localized the pathway by putting a halo in the tricuspid annulus, and after that, before that actually, we from pacing at the RA appendage, a narrow QRS tachycardia was induced, and entrainment and his refractory PVC showed it to be a part of the retrograde to be pathway. So antegrade through the AV node and the retrograde through the pathway. Antegrade, there is his going to the AV node, and retrograde going to the pathway. So there was a pulling of the A with the reset of the circuit. So during after putting the halo, the earliest A was found in the right posterolateral RA. So ablation was done in that area only. The case importance is that the presence of double transition, people have said that that may be associated with posterolateral RA pathways, which is also the case here. Also, the RA and CS dissociation can be explained by two sources of activation, the RA appendage by the pathway and CS by the AV node. And the dissociation of CS signal after fragmentation can be explained by local block at CS musculature at higher pacing rate. The second thing, that VA jump for the rest of the CSA at 290 milliseconds can be explained by jump of retrograde CS activation from pathway to the node. So what is the importance of presenting this case? It is the dissociation of CS musculature can lead to wave reflection and micro reentry in presence of pathways, and can be one of the mechanisms by which AF can occur in patients with WPW syndrome. Also, it has been shown that persons having CS signal fragmentation are likely to have propensity for paroxysmal AF, which can persist even after accessory pathway ablation in these patients. And the increase of pre-excitation from RA appendage and not from CS proximal may be also due to a functional line of block between the three sides, also exemplified with RA and CS dissociation. Now, this is actually same only. AF can occur in 50% in WPW. And so risk factor, we have seen that it can be multiple pathways, AVRT induction and manifest accessory pathway. But there is no definite relationship with the pathway location. Accessory pathway ERP and SPEDI during AF determines the risk of SCD, not the risk of AF. An accessory pathway ERP does not differ between patients of AVRT and AF, indicating that AVRT is the most common mode of induction of spontaneous AF. 90% of the AF are cured by accessory pathway ablation, but some patients can have a persistent vulnerability. Now that can be in these sort of patients where you can have a CS potential, which is dissociation. Mechanism, people have told that that can be due to an intraatrial pressure rise in case of AVRT and also ventricular pacing, which can induce AF. The second mechanism, what we had telling that it can be due to wave reflection and micro reentry, and that may be important in that sort of patients. So there are some computational analysis, not great studies to predict that. So conclusion, this case shows that simultaneous activation of different atrium through the pathway and AV node or between fast and slow component of the same pathway may be related to increased propensity of AF. Also, the CS signal fragmentation is seen on ventricular pacing, and that can promote reflection of wave and reentry and can account for AF. Thank you.
Yeah, Suchit, thank you. One comment and one question before other questions are taken. One thing is when we have a difficulty in deciphering the pre-excitation on the ECG, and when you pace atrium like what you did, and you showed that the pre-excitation was clearly from the right side, where you found that it was totally negative from V1 onwards to V2, is like yeah.
V5.
Yeah, this is what generally see whenever you have an issue. This is exactly what is clinically done. Is a you pace it. This happens even during intermittent pre-excitation. You pace on the lab, and this you take it as a site of pre-excitation and map in this manner. And the second question is when you paced the VA, which was dissociating. I just wanted to see, was there a gradual slowing? Was it a decremental pathway conduction, or was it a sudden jump?
No, they have initially these potentials were slowly coming out. This part, for fast part, the CS potentials, the part of that CS potential, CSA was dissociating. This part is dissociating. Then what happened is that finally, what happened is that here, the earlier part of the CSA, which was still associated, suddenly jumped in this level. There is a sudden jump at 290 here.
Yeah. Oh, it was not as Oh, it was not a gradual.
Initially, it was a gradual dissociation.
Implementation, yeah.
This was a gradual, already dissociated signal. This and this are all dissociated. But the first part of the A, which is the CSA, that jumped here basically.
Okay.
So probably the His is earliest here. Probably that person jumped to node. Here there is no His says in. Here only it is C. So that I thought that was interesting thing. That's why I just thought I will share it.
Was this reproducible? Did it happen again and again, or this was just?
This was reproducible, sir. This was reproducible, and every time it was after that some ventricular pacing was leading to AF, and we had to cardiovert multiple times. We have to cardiovert multiple times in the lab. This was happening, and then it was going to AF. This was the initial phenomena what was happening. Then when we were coming down, it caused AF. It was not always by AVRT inducing AF. It was mostly by this way. Ventricular pacing was inducing AF.
It looks some sort of disconnection between the left atrium, CS musculature, and the rest of the atrium.
Probably that might be one. That's why I thought I will present, because that may be a propensity for this sort of patients to develop AF, because two atrial wave fronts are traveling, and that can. There is some analysis, but there is no study as such like that. Others can tell me. I don't know.
It could be because of a retrograde right bundle branch block.
that led to decreased delayed depolarization of the CS?
Retrograde right bundle branch block. The issue is that we see here the
And
His has
you
come
are
out
near
here.
the base, or so the conduction to the right pathway occurred in time is always fixed, but retrograde conduction through the right bundle branch block to the AV node or to the other part, because this bundle branch, this early retrograde depolarization of the right atrium will not able to go directly to the left atrium until it goes through the fast pathway and septum.
But ventricular pacing, if it has to go through the RA,
There is
it is going
increased jump.
directly.
You see the
and it has
HA
going
jump,
to,
what you are showing, VV2, and that has led to retrograde bundle branch block, and that led to VA jump.
okay. Yeah, that can be. I think that can be.
Yeah,
This
VA
jump can be due to retrograde conduction through this thing also possible. But here we see the RA and almost CS is very early. Now RA is remaining here, but the CS
RA is fixed because of you are near to the you are pacing near to the pathway.
no, yeah. RA is yeah, right.
You are pacing near the basal part, and that's why retrograde right bundle branch block has caused the jump and led to VA interval increase.
In the third and fourth beat, you see a split atrial signal, which is difficult to see, as if there is some conduction delay happening. So
Yes.
that should not happen with a retrograde RBBB. You should not see a split atrial signal in the retrograde limb when beats number 3 and 4. That's a little tough thing to explain.
Yeah,
I think it bears to mention that if one is looking for retrograde bundle branch block, there should be a V to H jump, which we don't see there. The relationship from the V to the H is maintained. So if one is looking for a retrograde bundle branch block, that has to be noted. But in all the RV pacing, the stint, or you can say from the RV to the H is maintained. It is the H to the A that is moved out. So in the slide that is shown here right now, there is absolutely no evidence of retrograde bundle branch block, retrograde right bundle branch block.
Yeah, sir. Definitely that VH should increase before having this.
And that hasn't changed. So in the slides that you're showing right now, I just wanted to point out, because, you know, when we're discussing cases, if there's a difference there, you know, it's best to mention so that for the education of all. I think the key thing that, at least from the slides that's noted here, is the V2 or the pacing to the RA signal is maintained. And as mentioned correctly, could have been going up through the pathway. But if you look at the CS signals, there is a LA signal and a CS musculature signal. What we see here is at some point, suddenly both the LA signal and the CS musculature signal is jumped out. So when you pace it to 300, it's all maintained, right? And then when you come to 300,
the 300 is the beginning of it.
Yes. So when you come to 300, you see that actually you can say whether is it the LA or is it the CS musculature, and looks more like the CS musculature because it's a near field signal. The CS musculature signal jumped out, right? You can see that, but still the V to A, or you can say the V to the LA is maintained.
Yes.
And that's at, what was the speed? Your slide is obscuring it. What was the speed there? Was it?
This one 300, sir. This is 300.
300. So at 300, your V to LA is maintained, but the CS is obviously either delayed or blocked. One of these is happening.
Yes, sir.
Only
there
way
are
we
two components, I think.
Correct. But in a CS, you can have the LA component and the CS musculature component.
Okay.
Right. So the question is, which is which? So if you're going at the only way to know it's truly dissociated is you keep pacing, and then, you know, just like you see VA block and sinus beating at its own rate, you have to demonstrate that, right?
These are all dissociated, fully dissociated signals. Yes.
Correct.
So this is one signal, but this one part is associated.
Correct.
This is associated.
Yeah, so there, this is a very nice slide. In this one, you can see that both the LA jumped out also, right? The V to LA is out, and then the CS is already dissociated by this time.
Yes, sir. So this may be also LA definitely because it's not a sharp signal and has a maybe a far field component or something before.
So that could be the V2, right? In a CS, you have both the V and the A.
Yeah, V, I thought this is the V.
Correct,
This
correct.
is
I agree. A, that could be the LA. And
Yeah.
then the next to it is the CS musculature signal.
Yes, sir. So that was something I have
could
never
the next
seen.
one be from ligament of Marshall?
Yeah, that is also one of the possibility. That is also one of the possibility because that area usually.
So, I mean, it bears in mind where the catheter is, right? That's a big question here.
Catheter was, yeah, I don't have a fluoro, but I think it was, well, means that area maybe 5-6 or 3-4-5-6. Ligament of Marshall, maybe that area.
Yeah, I mean, that could be the possibility. I mean, depending on, because only the person who put the catheter knows exactly where it was, right? See, for example, if you believe that CS 7-8 was actually in the os, then we would have expected the CS musculature to be there too, right? Which we don't see.
Yeah, so that is not seen here. Yes.
Yeah. So then that possibly could be, as someone pointed out, it could be, you know, you got to think of all differentials where it could be a ligament of Marshall or not.
That is one of the reasons they have shown that this may be due to, CS musculature signals dissociating may lead more to AF, something like that, after pathway ablation also.
Wonderful. It's nice.
The other
nice
thing, Suchit, is if your catheter, CS catheter is too deep, then from 1, 2, or 3, 4, LA appendage potential would be probably in only one of the CS bipoles, obviously. You're recording here from multiple bipoles, so that's a little unlikely. But of other sites from where a separate signal is recorded, LA appendage potential can be recorded from different places. Or LIPV can be in this scenario.
But A is more than V, and V is not very great here. If it is very deep, that can cause a mode of V.
Did you have this after ablation also? The same kind of?
No. After ablation, we never had this. There was no AF also.
So I think there are two things. One is LACS dissociation, as Dr. Paul mentioned. Plus, in addition, you have an increased interval from RA to LA. So it would have been interesting after ablation if you could pace from the RA appendage catheter and see whether your time to LA signals increases.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because was the patient on any medicines prior to the ablation, on amiodarone or something?
No, not an amiodarone, surely not an amiodarone. He was on beta blocker and flecainide, but that was stopped 5 days before.
Yeah, so this is basically interatrial prolongation.
Dissociation.
Not dissociation, but prolongation, and LA and CS dissociation.
Yeah.
So that is the thing, yes, sir. Maybe that prolongation, that may be by the node this is going on, and this is going on to the pathway.
No, I don't think so. It is
okay.
It's not going through the node. It is going to the RA through the pathway, and then to the LA, it's going through the Bachmann bundles and other interatrial tracts. But there is a delay in the conduction from RA to LA. So that can explain all the findings. Plus, there is a dissociation from LA to CS, and that's why you see double signals in the CS which are dissociated.
But Karthikeya, how did you explain it occurring at the same cycle length? There is no change, 290, 290, 290.
Yeah, that's what. So RA to LA, there is 1-to-1 conduction, but a delay. But LA to CS, there is a block.
LA to
CS, there is a block.
That is great, yes.
Or a higher degree of block, maybe second degree of block. So you kind of see a Venki back from LA to CS, but RA to LA, there is 1-to-1 conduction, but prolonged.
Somebody has done an ablation over there and created a line of block.
No, but it was who?
Somebody's conduct on a previous procedure.
Oh, the patient had a previous procedure?
Did he have? No.
I don't think so.
That was not mentioned.
This phenomenon has been previously described by Jackman's group also, the CS to atrial musculature connections are varied. There are a lot of anatomical variations in that. So probably there is the proximal CS to left atrial connections may be very sparse or not possible, not there. And the CS musculature to atrial connection is only very distal. So possibly there is proximal to distal CS musculature activation, then there is a turnaround and rest of the CS musculature or atrium are getting activated there. That is one possibility I can think.
Hello, can I just make a comment? Maya here.
Yeah, go ahead.
One easy thing would have been to just paste the CS, with the potentials which you see, and then just see whether they get captured. For example, if you paste the CS and you get a capture of that EGM, you know that this is a local CS potential. And if you go to the left atrial, of course, the left atrial means difficult. You may have to do a transeptal, but if you just go to the left atrium, do a pacing there, and then see that the potential is dissociated, that is a conclusive evidence that this is a near field which you are capturing. So this is basically dissociating of the, as Karthik has said, LA and the CS. RA is still continuing with the RV, means the RV is followed by the RA potential. But basically dissociation, and this is very common. Even when you see in atrial flutter, sometimes in atrial flutters you will see there is one activation pattern in the left atrium while the CS is totally different. So this is just a dissociation of the CS and the LA, as Karthik said. Only thing, those potential one could have paced and seen whether they capture, local capture is there. That would have just given us more evidence to confirm that this is the CS and this is the LA, something like that. But nice case, nice potentials.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, Suchit.
Yeah. My laptop somehow crashed actually. This is from my phone. So
you spoke
anyway.
so loudly.
Huh? Yeah, something got crashed. Yeah, I don't know. So here I am on the phone.
Okay.
So did your laptop had an exposure to the coronavirus? What?
I don't know. I actually today I'm using Zoom fast in my laptop. I don't know.
So get it
That
tested then.
I don't know. This has never occurred. Somehow it occurred now. I have never used Zoom here. It's first time.
So we are awake after 2 back-to-back Zoom seminars. Zoom.
Yeah, some issue occurred. I don't know. Anyway.
Ashish, you don't look awake.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Wake up and ask a question.
Ashish doesn't look as if he's awake. It seems he's just woken up from a nice slumber. Yeah. Okay. Do we have more questions? Highgrave, Nitish?
Very interesting cases. Both of them, all four cases.
Nitish, we can't hear you.
Hello. I said all four cases were really fantastic.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The first is actually not very worked out very well. Means I should have done a lot of maneuvers, but I have not done. I don't know. That is around 2-3 years back, that case.
The phenomena were interesting, Suchit. Good selection.
Yeah.
That is the only thing I think. So
that's great. So Dr. Saxena joined us late. Hi, sir. How are you doing?
Was fine, thanks. Sorry, got a bit late.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the cases? You got to hear both Suchit's cases?
Good cases, yeah. From Suchit, at least I could hear.
Deepak showed us very good
cases,
VT cases. One of them was star VT,
understand.
the other was frequent PVCs. Very good cases.
Just I wanted to say about the first case where you have automaticity from the pathway that happens in ventricular or nodovascular pathway as happened in atriovascular pathway.
okay.
And there you have a potential like this in CS, and people have ablated by seeing this potential in this pathway.
Okay.
On the left side.
Okay. So that may be left-sided nodovascular.
Few days back in circulation arrhythmia electrophysiology, They ablated left side, and where the automaticity can be present in the automaticity features of node. So if the connection is of the pathway with the node in the CS, maybe right, maybe left inferior extension or so. Actually, you could have shown us the fluoro where you ablated first case or second case. First case would have been of help.
So I don't think that I don't have now.
Per se, rapid conducting pathway has no automaticity itself. Only the those who comes out from the nodal connection, they have these features.
Yeah, that is the thing. That is what. That's why I thought I will present it basically. Because
so maybe it's connection with the node to the left side.
But that crossover of signals from V to A, that was not very. That crossover of signals, that was not very clear to me.
Although the pre-excitation was much more marked, so unlikely that should, because pre-excitation should be very minimal.
Where?
That is the against of those things.
Okay. Maybe so.
So if there are no more comments, Highgrave Nitish. Thank you so much, and thank you Deepak, thank you Suchit, and
yes, thank you madam. Thank you others.
Thanks everybody for this chance. It was excellent.
Yeah.
So we will be. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, and we will be rejoining on Friday, and we have a very interesting and a surprise talk by Dr. Anil Saxena, our president. He will, for a change, not discuss EP. He will give us a very interesting. Sorry, sir, come again.
Already we have discussed so much EP in last couple of weeks.
Right. So that overdose of EP is going to be analyzed in a very good way by his statistics, and we are going to have a good p-value. So please do join us on Friday evening, same time, 6 p.m. And till then, stay safe and keep going and doing the good work. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, madam. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.